Dave Gardy here for another Ballast Water Treatment Report number 11 and 12. We're doing a two-part series. We're going to do the first one here on the new VIDA Act. And with us is Steve Candito, who's a CEO of a company called Ecochlor. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Nice to see you, Dave, again.
Now, the VIDA Act just passed both houses of Congress, going to go to the President's desk. First of all, what is VIDA? Give us an overview. What does it even stand for?
So VIDA stands for the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act, and this has actually been a piece of legislation that the industry has been pushing for many, many years. And the key component is to try to make a uniform regulation for all of the U.S. That the federal law would control rather than having each individual state control laws, which has been the past.
Now, there's going to have to be some implementation on this. The EPA is going to probably have to set a new round of regulations up for this. How long does that take?
Yeah, so that's true. So the first thing that VIDA did, in addition to taking control federally, it divided the responsibilities between the EPA for setting the standards and then the Coast Guard for actually enforcing the standards. And so, yes, the EPA has 2 years now to set the new standards. Now, we're not sure what they're going to do. We're not really expecting that they're going to be much different than what the current standards are, but the EPA has to formalize that over the next 2 years.
Now, as you mentioned, the big part of this was it got it out of the state's hands, and the federal government now is the lone, so there isn't the separate regulation. But the states lobbied heavily to get something in return for that. What did they get?
Well, that's a key point, right? And that's probably why we didn't get VIDA passed up until now, is because if it just allowed the federal government to take control, the states weren't going to be happy with that. So, not surprisingly, the states that were most concerned about this new legislation were, of course, the Great Lakes states up there. The freshwater particularly had some issues. And then the West Coast states, states like California, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and Hawaii. So first, the Great Lakes states basically got two things that they wanted to agree to this. Number one, they got a Great Lakes Commission that has some influence on the EPA in setting those standards. And then secondarily, the Great Lakes got sort of an extra level of protection in the standard, in that they require the ships to do a ballast water exchange as well as treat. So that's what was done for the Great Lakes. And then on the West Coast, it was similar. They wanted sort of both exchange and treatment, but the West Coast states said, if you can actually treat to a standard that's 100 times more than what the federal standard is, then you don't have to do the exchange. So it's still a little complicated, but at least we really have the one set of regulations through the Coast Guard and the EPA now.
Now, this is all seems to be a work in progress, and I'm curious as to what happens when new technologies are evolving every day. Did VIDA address what happens when a new technology shows up in the marketplace?
It did, and in fact, that was another element of what the states were looking for, particularly the West Coast states, and Washington State has had a history of looking at best achievable protection standards. And what that basically means is that over time, if technology improves so that we can have a higher standard, then the Coast Guard and the EPA have to look at that and ultimately implement it if those technologies are really practical.
And there are a lot of new technologies out there, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's about 11 systems that are approved today. There's another 6 or so in the pipeline. So, there's plenty of manufacturers out there that are trying new things and innovative ways to improve the process. So, yeah, we're going to see new technologies.
Okay, well, that's part one. We want to process this slowly, so we're going to have a part one and part two in the VIDA Act because there's a lot to process. So thanks a lot, Steve Candito, CEO of Ecochlor. And for the Ballast Water Treatment Report number 11, stay tuned for number 12. I'm Dave Gardy from New York.